This is my time lapse of the assembly of the millwright power route. Uh, Price on this at this time was approximately $3,100 with shipping. Maybe a little bit less, something like that. But anyway, so some of the tools that I used on this build were a knife I used to open some of the packaging, a crescent wrench, Phillips and flathead screwdriver, 7/16 wrench, two 9/32 wrenches that were required to get to two of the bolts and nuts that I couldn't get a socket into, an eyeglass flathead screwdriver I used to push on some of the wire connectors and generally get into tight places and move some things around, tape measure, needle nose pliers. I use those for a few things around the wire connectors, but generally the big reason I used them was in lieu of snap ring pliers. I highly recommend getting the snap ring pliers. It's so much easier. Sockets used were 7/32, quarter inch, 9/32, 5/16, 3/8, and half inch. Allen wrenches used were 3/16, 5mm, 3mm, 2.5mm, and 2mm. I'll put that tool listing in the video description. So, during the assembly, I did make a few mistakes. Namely, the corner brackets that hold the table to the table legs. I put three of those on backwards or upside down, however you want to look at it. The two small holes that don't look like they go to anything should be vertical and not horizontal. I had to fix those at a later stage. You'll see that coming up in a little bit, and we'll get into that later. Also, there's three brackets that hold the tabletop to this to the base in the middle. I think based on the instructions that I have those on the wrong side, but it really doesn't matter. It's not affecting anything, and it holds the table in about the same place. It's doing fine. Tapping fluid, I use WD-40. I highly recommend getting actual tapping fluid. It's just what I had around the shop. I couldn't find my tapping fluid. I wasn't fighting it. My table here is on wheels, and I do spin it around a few times to try and get better camera angles for y'all, but I didn't do that at this point for whatever reason. I was looking more at the instructions. I also did spend a few days on this build, so you'll see me change jacket and shirt multiple times. That's just what it is. This can be built in 1 to 2 days. It really could. I spent probably a week on it just based on my free time. As said, the snap ring pliers I can't recommend enough. As said, I used a pair of needle nose pliers to get in, and basically needle nose in my thumb to get the snap rings into place on these what is it, the ball screw connectors, however you want to, the bearings for them, whatever you want to call it. There were a few other mistakes that I made, such as during the homing switch installation on the Z-axis. I broke a screw there, and I ended up having to, I couldn't get it out of there, so I ended up just drilling a whole new hole and putting a new screw in at about the same place. Works fine. Not a huge deal that I broke that screw. Shipping of this thing, one of the three boxes when it got to me was quite damaged, and some of the bed plates were a little bit dented on the ends, and I'm gonna just take a file to that and mill that, or scrape that down a bit. It'll be fine. Doesn't really affect the overall performance of the machine or assembly of the machine. When it came to the computer of this thing, I did have a spare computer I hadn't used in a couple of years. It had been sitting in my attic. I pulled down. It took me almost a full day to clean that up and get it Windows updated and everything else so I could actually use it. But it's what it is. It works fine. It doesn't have to be a super machine supercomputer to run this machine. I do recommend having a second person when it comes to flipping this thing over. I use some wooden blocks to hold it, etc. as I flipped it over. It's a whole lot easier if you have a second person. You don't want to screw up that ball screw by putting any weight on this on any of the plates in the wrong places. Overall, I got it over in one go by myself, but that was just me being impatient in the middle of the night, and I couldn't get anybody over to help me out. I did put the legs on backwards. The big legs should be in the front at this stage, and the little legs in the back. As I read further on, I found out which ones were which and actually put them in the right place. But the instructions just said front and back legs. It didn't tell you which was which. My mistake. As you can see, I've got one of the back braces in the correct position with those two little holes vertical, and the other one, the two little holes are horizontal. As I said, I fix that later as I get to the anti-wreck cable system as I'm putting that in and figure out how to fix that. But it wasn't hard to fix as I did it. I did print the instructions for this, and every now and then I had to refer to my phone or a tablet to get a better picture or a better view of the pictures, just because my printout had come out a little too dark. But overall, the instructions were fairly clear. There's a few places that it just wasn't clear, and I had to figure out through trial and error how to fix it, or how to proceed, how to continue. I did end up with a lot of extra screws and bolts, or screws and washers. It wasn't very clear where washers should go and where they shouldn't. Many places it said, make sure you put a washer here, don't put a washer there. But based on the number of extra washers I have, it's very clear to me that washers didn't go in some places that they probably should have. I also didn't use Loctite like I probably should for some of the things. And I'm going to end up going back, and as things unscrew themselves, I'm going to have to rescrew them back, or rescrew them in with Loctite. But such is the nature of my build. There's another point coming up. We're putting this the gantry on top. You should probably have a second person as well. Again, I used a couple wooden blocks and then lowered it down once I had the bearings and the blocks in place. But two people would be a whole lot easier to do this with. As I said, I did it my way. It worked. I was in a rush. My battery did die a few times during this build, so there's a few things that got skipped out or where I just got frustrated and had to walk away for a little bit. I busted my knuckles once. Pretty good. Walked away after that for a little bit, just got frustrated, as I said. But overall, it's a pretty easy build. It's just time consuming. There's a lot of little parts. There's a whole lot of screws. One thing I am going to be adding to this table is I'm going to add from this view right here, I'm going to add a vertical riser on the rear left corner to mount my monitor to. Right now I have it just on the side of the machine, and it's kind of in the way. It's not in the best place. As I said, I'm going to put a vertical riser there and mount it a bit higher up, probably tomorrow. One thing that I did make a mistake here is the linear bearings. I put them on here. I put the plate on top of them for the Z-axis, and then because I was having trouble getting that snap ring in place, I ended up taking the whole plate and linear bearings off. Do not do that. I ended up having to go back, or trying to put it back on. I actually popped some of the bearings out of one of the linear bearings and had to spend some time on the floor, in the machine, etc., finding where 3 of the balls had come out and put them back in, then disassemble the thing, put it back on correctly again. And at this point, I actually went and got some snap ring pliers just because I couldn't get to that bottom piece. As I said, the camera actually went out there and it just appears in place correctly there because, as I said, I got frustrated and I did it wrong. Make sure you get the snap ring pliers to put that on. It's so much easier. Don't break your linear bearings. Yeah, I think it was right here, putting on the X-axis motor, that I ended up having to get two 9/32 wrenches because the socket would not fit in to that little area between the motor and the bearing on the other side to get in there. When it comes to the anti-wreck cable system, it went in pretty easy. I did use safety glasses and gloves for a little bit. I took the glasses off; they were just annoying, and the safety gloves, I poked myself twice not using them, but I couldn't get things into place with them on. It was just I didn't have enough fine control. When it comes to the router's power cord going through the drag trains here, or drag chains here, the power cable comes to just barely the end of my table here. I ended up mounting my power supply right to the side of the table. Alternatively, I could use another extension cord or something, but you don't have a whole lot of room there on where you're going to put that. There's just not a whole lot of cable left once it's run through all that drag chain. But it really should be in the drag chain. If you don't, it's going to cause other problems. I did build a small section under my table to hold the computer, just so it's out of the way, and I'm going to box that off a little bit more just to make sure chips and dust don't go in there, and put some filtration on the front and back. It'll hold air, or it'll hold heat a little bit more, but air will still filter out, and I won't get all the dust in there. I do still need to trim my router and do that fine tuning, but overall it's in place, it's working good, and the machine's cutting wood. So thank you for watching my video, and leave some comments.